Coming up on Network Africa, Sudan frees killer of a U.S. diplomat after financial settlement. Democratic Republic of Congo expels Rwandan officers from regional force. And Pope Francis departs Rome for a long-awaited visit to the Democratic Republic of Congo and South Sudan. Hello there and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. We begin in Sudan, where media reports say that the convicted killer of a U.S. diplomat, Granville, has been released from jail after he paid compensation to the victim's family. Abdel Raouf Abu Zaid told privately owned Sudan Tribune website that the authorities released him after they received documents from the U.S. showing that he had paid monetary compensation to the family. In June 2009, a Sudanese court convicted Abu Zaid and 4 other men in connection with the diplomat's killing and handed 4 of them to death penalty, including Abu Zaid. His release comes after he threatened to go on hunger strike over inhumane treatment by prison officials. The U.S. says its embassy is engaging government officials to obtain more information about the release. Mr. Granville was an employee of USAID when he was killed alongside a Sudanese colleague in Khartoum in 2008. The military in the Democratic Republic of Congo has expelled Rwandan soldiers attached to the command of the East African Community Regional Force based in the eastern town of Goma. The military says the Rwandan soldiers were sent away for security reasons and have already left Congolese soil. The regional force consists of soldiers from several East African countries who have joined the Congolese army with the support of UN peacekeepers in fighting rebel groups. Congo's army claims that Rwanda had, in response, recalled all its officers from DR Congo, but the authorities in Kigali have denied the claim. DR Congo had denied the involvement of Rwandan troops in the regional force that was deployed last year to the mineral-rich North Kivu province, but it allowed a few Rwandan officers to be part of the force's command, as well as a security verification team. Tensions between Kigali and Kinshasa worsened last week after Rwanda shot at a Congolese fighter jet near Goma airport. Meanwhile, the Pope Francis has departed Rome this morning for the Democratic Republic of Congo for a visit that will highlight the human cost of protracted conflict in the vast Central African country. The 86-year-old pontiff will celebrate Mass in the capital Kinshasa on Wednesday, February 1st, and meet victims of violence from the eastern part of the country, which is blighted by recurring fighting between rebels and government troops. The last papal visit to Congo was by John Paul II in 1985. First scheduled for last July, the Pope's trip was postponed because he was suffering a flare-up of a chronic knee ailment that he had originally planned to visit the eastern city of Goma, but that was scrapped because of the violence. Pope Francis will stay in Kinshasa until Friday morning, when he will fly to South Sudan, another country grappling with conflict and poverty. In the meantime, workers in Kinshasa have been preparing for Pope Francis' visit, where he is scheduled to address young people and catechists in the Martyrs Stadium in the capital on Thursday morning. A visitor from the Kolwezi diocese said the people had chartered planes to have the opportunity to see the Pope. The January 31st to February 5th visit to the DRC and South Sudan will take the 86-year-old Pope to places where Catholics make up about half of the population and where the Church is a key player in health and educational systems, as well as in democracy-building efforts. Pope Francis' knee had improved significantly, but he still uses a wheelchair and cane. Elsewhere now, Germany's Defense Minister Boris Pistorius is considering withdrawing his troops from the UN stabilization mission in Mali earlier than planned, since according to him, under current conditions, they cannot fulfill their mandate. The government announced in November that troops would be withdrawn in May 2024, but said that they might be withdrawn earlier if it was impossible to fly the drones that make it possible for soldiers to venture outside army bases. He adds that drones had last been able to fly before Christmas. Berlin had deployed about 1,000 troops to Mali, most of them near the northern town of Gao, where their main task is to gather reconnaissance for the UN peacekeeping mission, MINUSMA.
Wann was fliegen kann. Ich habe zugesagt, dass ich
So, no, nothing has changed in the current situation. We will continue to look when and what can fly. I have promised that I will travel to Mali before the decision on the extension of the mandate is made in May, probably before the change of command, in order to get a comprehensive picture of the experience of the last few months. But nothing has changed at the moment. I have spoken with everyone from Lebanon to Mali, Iraq, and many other places. Of course, NATO's mission in Kosovo in the Balkans. And I'm very, very impressed. Once again, I must say, by the professionalism, the calmness, the competence that the comrades radiate in missions that are sometimes anything but easy. Everyone is talking about Mali, and rightly so, but the missions in Iraq and Kurdistan are no less important and are taking place, at least at the moment, largely under the radar of public attention.
Zimbabwe has laid out the red carpet for Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, who was welcomed at Harare International Airport by President Emerson Mnangagwa, alongside dancers and cheering crowds. President Lukashenko's two-day trip comes on the heels of a tour of African countries by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Mr. Lavrov was attempting to shore up support for Russia's military actions in Ukraine. Belarusian state broadcaster Delta said main bilateral talks will take place today. There will also be a ceremony to mark a Belarus-backed program of mechanization on Zimbabwean farms. Let's get more on these visits. We're joined by international affairs analyst Yinka Oyeniji. Thank you for joining us today on the program.
All right, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Well, he joins us via Zoom from East Midlands in the United Kingdom. So let me start by asking you, what are the possible implications to Mali of the early withdrawal of German troops?
All right, so it depends from what perspective you want to look at these things, okay? Earlier in previous attendances that I had here, I said it that Africa would provide its own solutions to its own problems. Nobody can help Africa solve its own problems, no matter what aid and support we receive from foreign and Western powers. All right, so nobody knows our terrain like we do. Only recently, former President Olusegun Obasanjo helped to broker peace in Ethiopia. So there's a place of military might and support. There's a place of humanitarian aid, and there's a place of even engaging warring functions. So it's not a surprise, actually, that Germany will be thinking of withdrawing troops, because they would be largely ineffective unless and until they have support from indigenous locals to be able to identify the terrain and explain it. It's better than just losing casualties. We had this same scenario in Nigeria where United States also deployed troops to fight Boko Haram, and they could do little or nothing, because it still goes down to those on the ground, to nationals being patriotic enough to combine forces with foreign powers to say, let us make an end to this. So if that opportunity does not arise, if Germany does not get that prerogative, then it's a total waste of time and resources to continue to provide support in military sense that is not active in any manner at all. So I would say for Germany, it's a sensible move to make, and possibly also pushing the hands of African Union leaders. But more importantly, Africa by itself, through some of our elder statesmen, should start to think about how workable foreign interventions or foreign support can be in different parts of Africa where we are witnessing local wars, banditry, terrorism, and all of that. So we should have some kind of framework where the roles that each entity plays is clearly defined. Certainly, Germany cannot go by itself out into the streets or into any thick set to say They want to enforce peace in Mali without the full cooperation of Malians themselves and other strategic stakeholders in Africa.
So one of the points of the contention is the involvement of the Wagner group in the Malian army. With the benefit of hindsight, do you think that it was a bad idea for the Malian government to use their services?
We said it time and again. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, it doesn't make any good sense. Let me put it that way. It's almost like what is happening in Ukraine, where Russia is using ex-convicts and then opening up the prisons to say, come and fight war on our behalf. It doesn't make any sense. People have been convicted because they've done things wrong. How then do you mean to pray? I think that even convicts must have some kind of rights, which is to say that they can refuse to be used as tools of guerrilla warfare. All right. So this same mistake has been made several. It's the same mistake that could be made in Nigeria, where we start to say we want to arm vigilantes and all of these people are not trained. They are not ordinarily trained for responsible warfare. For even in war, we have rules of engagement. But if you bring in people who themselves are criminals to fight war, then there's no end to war crimes. Because even in war, you can still commit crimes. So it was never going to make any sense. Arming one side against the other, legitimizing criminality, will not put an end to war. It will just put a new coloration to the whole scenario entirely. So it has never helped anywhere where you arm one side against the other, especially who are questionable elements. In Afghanistan, Taliban is there doing its own. In Libya, it's the same thing that has happened. We should never look for people who oppose government on any legitimate or illegitimate reason and begin to arm them. How then do you mop up arms after we claim to have peace? How do you reorientate them to say that don't use these arms against patriotism acts that you should perpetrate in your country? We cannot continue to take those who are not trained ordinarily for warfare, because military is not just carrying guns and using ammunition. It's about educating on patriotism and how to be responsible. It's the reason why we must be responsible with weapons. So it was a no-no. It didn't need to have come to that, to be using prisoners or be using criminals to fight war. It will take longer to end those kind of wars and to mop up the consequences, negative consequences that are bound to emanate therefrom.
Right, so in your opinion, what should Mali be doing now to ensure peace within its borders?
This is an African problem, and it should be sorted at the level of the African countries that we have. We did it in Ethiopia, we did it successfully. Interestingly, today, the Transparency International has released its index, and Nigeria languishes at position 127, scoring 23 points on most corrupt countries in the world. There are a few African countries, only a handful of African countries are beneath Nigeria there. Some countries have been promoted, including Angola, on that list. So if you look around us, there is a new wave of interest in Africa. There is some improvement which we should build on, and that is to look for local solutions to our local problems. Foreign entities won't help us, whether they come as the president of Belarus, who is just coming here to foster the interest of the Russian president. Whether they come that way or they come to under the guise of trying to help us to solve our problems, it should still be the Africans' interest first. It should still be the Malian president. It should be the African Union seeking an end to the bloodshed that we have in Mali. Germany and the rest of the foreign countries, inclusive of Belarus and allies of Putin, have absolutely no business here. Unfortunately, you will find that it is countries that are blessed with resources that look attractive to all of these foreign interventions. We don't need them. They are after our resources and nothing more. By ourselves, we can reposition Africa into where we need to be. And that time is not a long time to come. In a few months, we will see tremendous improvement on the African landscape. You see peace being achieved in a few countries, and then we can position Africa for prosperity.
Well, with those comments, I believe you're talking about the Belarusian president's visit to Zimbabwe, but I must say we need to leave it there. Thank you so much, international affairs expert Nkau Unigi. Thank you for joining us today on Network Africa.
Thank you for having me. Thank you very much.
Still to come on the program. South Africa judge withdraws from Zuma corruption trial. We'll have details of that in a moment. Welcome back to the program. Liberia's President George Ware has announced that he is standing for re-election. In his annual State of the Nation address, Mr. Ware said he would be calling on Liberians to renew for a second time the mandates they gave him 6 years ago. Mr. Ware has been accused of economic mismanagement during his time in office. Last year, the United States imposed sanctions on a number of senior Liberian officials over corruption allegations, including Mr. Ware's chief of staff. Elections are scheduled for October. Well, in the latest rankings of the 2022 Corruption Perception Index, Nigeria has moved up 4 places from 154 out of 180 countries and territories. However, in spite of the slight movement to 150, the country maintained its previous score of 24 out of 100 points from 2022, and the country has remained consistently low in the last 10 years. According to the Executive Director of the Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, CISLAC, Mr. Awal Rafsanjani, some reforms in the public are responsible for the improvement, although there's more work to be done.
Some notable developments within the legal framework in the country that support, for example, democracy. The Electoral Act that was amended was one of the reasons why, this score, or rather this ranking at 10, that's number one. Number two, the government had made effort to ensure that we have a law on proceeds of crime, and management of asset, what before we did not have, and now we have it in place. So hopefully, if there's implementation and compliance on that, we will see better management of recovered asset in Nigeria. Thirdly, we have also noted the efforts of the anti-corruption agencies making a lot of sacrifices, making a lot of good work for the country to get rid of corruption. And equally important, the passage of the Anti-Money Laundering and Prohibition Act is also one of the reasons why we have, if you like, have this improvement, or that we did not really decline further. So these are things which, if government had been listening and taking advices, probably we would have made tremendous improvement in our scoring and ranking. But we are happy as a nation that we are still making effort. The government is making effort to ensure that those lapses are addressed.
And a move likely to cause further delays. A South African judge presiding over the corruption trial of former President Jacob Zuma has withdrawn from the case. Judge Piet Cohen said he wanted to avoid any risk of compromising the perception of justice after he earlier ruled against Mr. Zuma's efforts to force out the prosecutor. Mr. Zuma is facing 16 counts of fraud and racketeering over the purchase of fighter jets and other arms equipment when he was vice president in the 1990s. 18 months ago, he was given a 15-month jail term for contempt of court in connection with another corruption case. He is denied any wrongdoing. Staying in South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa has told his party, the African National Congress, that the government is likely to consider imposing a national state of emergency over the electricity crisis it's currently struggling with. Addressing the close of the ANC National Executive Committee meeting on Monday night, President Ramaphosa said party leaders have backed calls for the state of disaster to speedily address South Africa's power crisis in a much shorter period than the 18 to 24 months government had originally communicated to citizens. Mr. Ramaphosa and his cabinet are set to meet on Wednesday to thrash out government's priorities for 2023 ahead of next week's State of the Nation address.
This Lekgotla has provided clear direction on what needs to be done to end the energy crisis as a matter of extreme urgency and to establish a firm foundation for energy security and sustainability into the future. It was observed that it would be necessary to have a national state of disaster because that would enable us to have the instruments that would be necessary to fully address the challenge that our nation faces. I must add that this proposal has been articulated in a number of consultations that we have held with a number of role players, from traditional leaders to social formations, community-based organizations, to trade unions, business, and many others. So I'd like to say that this matter is being addressed with the urgency that it requires. The Lekgotla agreed that a decisive national energy crisis action plan must be rolled out with a serious focus on the mobilization of the whole of government and society, so that this whole process should not be seen as the responsibility of government alone. This Lekgotla has agreed that coordination of our response also needs to be escalated to the most senior levels of government, and that we need to communicate more clearly, and the message must be clear. Yes, there should be many voices, but the message should be a singular message so that there is no confusion amongst our people. And this we shall do.
Still in South Africa, but over to the health sector. Health Products Regulatory Authority, SAHPRA, has approved the registration of Paxlovid for the treatment of the coronavirus. Paxlovid is an antiviral medicine manufactured by Pfizer, which contains a medicine used for treatment of mild and moderate COVID-19 in adults who do not require supplemental oxygen. Paxlovid consists of tablets for a 5-day oral treatment, and side effects to be expected include vomiting and altered taste. Meanwhile, vulnerable people in South Africa 50 years and above are now eligible for the 5th COVID-19 booster dose. This is according to Health Minister Dr. Joe Phala, who says this is in line with the seeking to maintain and enhance the protection against the current and evolving COVID-19 variants. The waiting period between the previous dose and this one is 180 days or 6 months. About 19 million people have been vaccinated against coronavirus in South Africa so far. More from South Africa. Preschoolers at a creche in Mamelodi Township near Pretoria are all set to begin school in a new-look premises revamped by the city government and the Nigerian High Commission, according to the Nigerian High Commissioner to South Africa, Ambassador Mohammed Manta. It's part of the mission's social responsibility projects to promote cohesion and development between Nigerians and members of their host communities.
In 2020, this preschool in Mamelodi Township near Pretoria was forced to close its doors owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. 3 years later, the school has been revamped, upgraded, and ready to welcome the little ones. Along with the preschool's new look is a brand new playground, and it's all thanks to the Nigerian High Commission. Nigeria's High Commissioner to South Africa, Ambassador Mohammed Manta, who cut the tape with the Mayor of Tshwane, Randolph Williams, shares how the idea of the In It Together project came about.
In It Together is a brainchild of the Nigeria High Commission, where we can display part of our social corporate responsibility to the communities that we interact with in our daily diplomatic practice. And I'm happy that we are kickstarting this project today from Mamelodi. We also have other centers in mind as the year progresses.
The problem has always been that we haven't invested enough money in early childhood development centers. So we are now trying to overcome that shortfall in our educational system. And hopefully what we see today will be a small contribution to our children having a better foundation in this area of Mamelodi.
Natalia Mnisi from the city's Department of Early Childhood Development says young minds need to be nurtured through class learning and play.
The play that we engage in the early childhood development sector is directed towards development of the young brain. Structured play with a view to make sure that the child develops according to the milestones.
And with a high rate of vandalism recorded in schools across South Africa, member of the Mayoral Committee for Community and Social Development, Peggy De Bruyn, has appealed to the Mamelodi community to work with the city to protect schools around.
Look after these facilities. We cannot be fixing things every time. It requires a budget for us to come back as a city, leaving our partners to say, let's fix things when we should be building other centers somewhere. Luna become our eyes and ears so that we can deal with these things. Actually, there should be no vandalism at all.
Children were not part of the launch, but parents were. Agnes Ratsidi says she is very happy that the school has opened.
I'm glad that it's opening again after 2 years of closing due to COVID, but I'm glad it's opening. I'm so happy that my daughter, my son will all find a space to learn and play with other kids.
According to one of the private sector players who supported the Nigerian High Commission in this project, picking a school to help was not an easy task.
In choosing to sponsor this, I recognize the need of those who attend public schools. I attended public school myself at the early stage, though in Nigeria, and doing business here. I see sometimes some of these needs and challenges in the public schools here. So when the Nigerian embassy came up with the idea of, of a need together, we bought into it because of our passion to really support these little ones.
The revamped playground at Tendleleni Preschool is the first of the In It Together project, with this one being the first of 4 projects, according to the Nigerian High Commissioner. The project will now move to other provinces around the country.
In It Together, indeed. Well, that's Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.